All right, I believe we can get started. Welcome, everyone. I too enjoyed the introductory music. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Montgomery County's Black History Month celebration. I'm Dr. Tamara Williams, the Director of Montgomery County's Department of Health and Human Services. And again, I want to welcome everyone to the second in our series of events in celebration of Black History Month. The theme for today is education, financial institutions, and employment. But the overall theme for our Black History Month series is Know the Past, Shape the Future. Most people would agree that education, financial security, and employment are critical to thriving and building generational wealth. In the past, there were overt policies and practices that served to disenfranchise and exacerbate wealth disparities for Black citizens and other people of color. A Washington Post journalist once likened this to negative interest compounding in each generation. Many of these practices and attitudes, unfortunately, continue to exist within educational, employment, and financial lending institutions, but it needn't be this way. It is only by identifying these practices, by holding ourselves accountable for their impacts, and working together to change structural and systemic barriers that we can shape the future in a more equitable way. An observation that I had on the way to work, coupled with a recent exchange during a meeting, also reminded me that it's not just policies and practices, but attitudes and beliefs that need to soften, and how critical it is to change hearts and minds. While driving into work one day, I stopped to wait as two school buses on both sides of the street opened their doors to pick up children going to school. I'll admit that after I silently grumbled to myself that I was going to be late for work because I now had to wait behind two school buses, after I got over that, I took a look around. And it was during that brief period of time, it allowed me to observe a few things that I had never noticed before. On one side of the street was an apartment complex, and the children and families, by all appearances, were racially diverse. There appeared to be white, Black, Asian, and East Indian families. On the other side were townhomes, and those families were predominantly white. Both sides had parents or caring adults who lovingly saw their children off to school, waved, blew kisses as the school buses drove away. Then I got into work, and during a recent meeting, one of the meeting participants proceeded to describe the way in which those who live in apartments create an undue burden on schools, because those who live in apartments tend to be transient, have more behavioral issues, have poorer attendance, tend to do less well in school, and as a result need more special education services. And as someone who grew up in an apartment community, lived in that same apartment for 15 years, never missed a day of school, excelled academically, skipped a grade and was able to start college at 16, and had other friends of color who followed a similar path, I couldn't help but think, this is not my narrative, nor is it the narrative of so many successful African Americans. When I think of the charge of many of the important resistance movements and social justice movements in our nation's history, I think of one of my favorite sayings. It's a West African proverb that says, "The lion's story will never be known as long as the hunter is the one to tell it." Our collective task is to take back the narrative, to control it and tell our own story, and not allow it to be told by others who don't have our best interests at heart. So I hope that you enjoy the panel presentation today and that it is thought-provoking and inspires you to action in your own way. And now I will turn it over to the Reverend Canon Tania Smythe for the invocation.
Thank you, Dr. Williams. Good afternoon, everyone. No matter what the day has brought you so far, let us bow our heads and be present with one another. Almighty Father, you have gathered us, brothers and sisters. We are directors, educators, employers, advocates, community leaders, law enforcers, political movers, and comfort shakers. We are here to open our mouths to speak the truth, to be prophetic voices of the uncomfortable truth. You have given us this gift and opportunities to show the world your love through our actions, a platform to be the mouth for those muted, the power to vote for and hire those who rule based on your word, that we are one body. So when one part suffers, the whole body suffers. To spread your warning, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you have taught us, and to avoid them. Father, your love shows no partiality, and you have charged us with your greatest commandments. Love you with our whole heart, soul, and mind, and the second greatest, love our neighbors as ourselves. We pray now your word continues to be a lamp to our feet. We cannot change what is past, but we pray you give us the wisdom, the strength, and the humility to untangle the inequities, prejudices, and racism from the systems that keep your children oppressed. Allow our actions to be a lamp for generations to come so we can create a better future. Grant us strength to open our mouth and allow your spirit to guide our conversation today. Amen.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for those encouraging remarks, as well as Reverend Smythe for the invocation and setting the tone for this meeting. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so grateful to serve you as your moderator for today's panel discussion on Black resistance, education, financial institutions, and employment. My name is Toyka Williams, and I currently serve the great citizens of this exceptional county within its Office of Public Health as the Deputy Administrator for Operations and Culture. Thank you, Black History Month Committee, for your coordination, dedication, and diligence in making sure these programs are shared with the community for the past 17 years. Thank you all to those who journeyed in your resistance to make a change so that we can live in a world that is open, gracious, liberating, and free. I would like to take this time to honor the ancestors whose shoulders we stand on. They brought us to this very moment and knew that if we don't know our history, it is more challenging to navigate our future and plan for, navigate our present and plan for our future. A few housekeeping matters. Please make sure you're muted at all times. If you have a question or comment, you can place it in the chat. Members of the Black History Committee will continue to monitor their comments and our time throughout the discussion. This session is being recorded, so please be mindful of your vertical etiquette by minimizing distractions and turning off your video if you're not engaged or need to step away. With that said, let's pause and enjoy one of my favorite songs. In 1919, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP, dubbed Lift Every Voice and Sing the Negro National Anthem for its power in voicing a cry for liberation and affirmation for African American people. Today, the anthem will be sung by Mr. David K. Stewart.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the heart of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought. Facing the rising Son of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Stony, stony the road we tried, bitter the chastising ride, felt in the days when hope and unborn had died, yet with a step we have not we come to the place for which our fathers sighed. We have come over the way that with tears have been watered. We have come treading our path with the blood of the slaughtered. Out from the gloom we pass, now till we stand at last. Let us march on till victory is won. God of our wings, God of our silence, tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by his might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places our God where we met thee, lest our hearts drunk from the wine of the world we forget. Shadow beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land.
Thank you so much, Mr. Stewart. Now we will hear from our Commissioner Ken Lawrence.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Toika, and thank you, Toika, for giving me my word of the day, or my 2 words, vertical etiquette. Thank you. I wrote that down, and I will learn that. So it's good to see everyone. It's been 1 week in now, and as I announced last week, we would be swearing in a new commissioner at 3 o'clock that day. And that happened, and she's here on the Zoom with us. Jamila Winder is our newest commissioner, and she's the first African-American woman to serve as a commissioner in Montgomery County history. So Jamila's going to speak for herself because she always does, but I will just say that she was formerly serving as the chair of the East Norton Board of Supervisors. She's resigned that position to join us, and she also served on the Norristown Area School District. And I truly believe that being a school district director is one of the most thankless jobs in public service, but also one of the most important jobs in public service. And as I said last week at Jamila's swearing in, I don't want the historic nature of her appointment to distract from what a tremendously accomplished woman that she is in her own right. And you're going to get to know her over this next year and probably beyond. And you'll know everybody loves Jamila because she has a heart to serve and a mind to lead. So with that, I will kick it over to my new governing partner, Jamila Winder.
Thank you, Commissioner Lawrence, and thanks so much for having me. This new beginning comes as a full circle moment brought to life. As I mentioned at my swearing in, this moment, I reflect on Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And you all know that famous excerpt where he talks about his 4 little children. So I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And I know today, with the swearing in of me last week, Dr. King's dream is truly a reality, and I'm blessed for that. As I think about today's program, I reflect on my personal sheroes. Many of you may have seen my mother, Betty, who was at my swearing in, and I think about my grandmother, the Reverend Dr. Mary B. Duff, who is now 103 years old. So she's my living grandmother. And when I was growing up, my grandmother would often tell me stories about walking to school in the segregated South to her one-room schoolhouse, where white children rode the bus and yelled out the N-word every day on her way to school. But those moments didn't define her. My grandmother is a reminder of our country's dark past. She was raised during a time where education, financial, and employment opportunities were so limited. My grandmother, despite growing up in the segregated South, went on to become an educator, where she was awarded PA State Teacher of the Year in 1972. And she remains to this day our matriarch and an exemplary model of grace, dignity, and strength. In 1983, my parents relocated their young family to East Narton Township from Philadelphia. Their vision for our lives as children was that we would have an abundance of opportunities, but that wouldn't be without challenge. They wanted to ensure my brother and I had access to good schools, so I'm a proud product of the Norristown area school system, employment opportunities, and financial health, all in an area that I've proudly called home for more than 40 years. My mother, a steadfast and loyal educator in the public school system, instilled in me the importance of service, giving back, and an unwavering belief that education is truly a superpower. My father, many of you heard me tell this story, was deputy warden at the PA Department of Corrections at Gradeford. And as you can imagine, his teachings, coupled with my mother's, were of an alternate side of life, applying stories where opportunities were lacking, struggles were abundant, and hope had seemed lost for many in its interactions. So the palatable realities my parents brought home each day to my brother and I created an awareness in me that a bridge surely could be made between their worlds and those in its orbit. And I was determined to construct a way to live out their vision. I represent 3 generations of Black women, pioneering for their families, breaking barriers for their communities, and initiating change where it matters most. And it is a great honor to be able to serve our community in this capacity, and I recognize the enormity of the role I've been given. I want to ensure that my lived experiences serve as a model for the Black community in Montgomery County. We must work to ensure that future generations of Black boys and girls have access to a wide range of educational and employment opportunities that in turn lead to financial health. And so we have a vast amount of work to do, but I look forward to working with all of you, our community, in the weeks and months ahead. So thank you for giving me a little bit of time, and so good to be here.
Thank you, Commissioner Lawrence and Commissioner Winder, for your remarks. We are inspired by your presence and your leadership today and moving forward. We look forward to the work. When Carter G. Woodson, the father of Black history, established Negro History Week in 1926, he realized the importance of providing a theme to focus the attention to the public. This year's theme, Black resistance, has taken many forms throughout history: physical and intellectual bodies through armed resistance, voluntary immigration, nonviolence, education, literature, sports, media, legislation, politics, and the list goes on. And it is not uncommon to witness resistance in the three areas that we will discuss today. Today, we're joined by three panelists who will help us understand more. We would like to welcome Ms. Carla Hill. Ms. Hill has leveraged her life and career experiences as a wife, mother of 2 sons, a certified human resources leader, and business owner to empower herself and others. She is the principal and owner of GPS Career and Business Strategies. She helps business owners and individuals transform their organizations and careers via human resources and career planning strategies. A native of New York, Carla attributes her passion for education and economic inclusion to her upbringing and exposure to diverse and immigrant communities. This Northwest Philadelphian enjoys spending her free time with her husband, 2 sons, and her mother. Welcome, Ms. Hill. Welcome to Mr. Kelvin Casey Carolina, affectionately known as Mr. Citadel. Casey Carolina has been a senior financial service representative with Citadel Credit Union for the past 7 years. However, his history with the financial services industry has spanned more than 47 years. As a banker at Citadel, he has achieved the highest level of employee recognition as president counsel for 4 consecutive years. He loves his job and loves helping people to earn more money with various banking products and services that will provide stability in their finances. He is a husband of 42 years, a father of 33 years. He loves to entertain at home with his wife and family, go out to eat, watch movies, and deep sea fishing. And finally, we welcome Ms. Erica Hampton. Dr. Erica Hampton believes every student deserves a teacher who will be a champion for them. For the past 20 years, she has been a teacher and student advocate in the Norristown Area School District. Currently, she is a lead teacher at Stewart Middle School in Norristown, where she sponsors the student council and sits on the Cultural Proficiency Committee. Dr. Hampton previously taught 6th through 8th grade English language arts and social studies, and sat on the district social studies curriculum writing committee. She's a longtime resident of Norristown and member of the Norristown community, and is dedicated to ensuring that every child receives an education for life. The first question will go to Dr. Hampton. Dr. Hampton, education, whether in elementary, secondary, or higher education institutions, has been seen as a way for Black people and communities to resist the narrative that Black people are intellectually inferior. What has been your experience as an educator in a largely minority community? And from your experiences, how has the system impacted that community?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm honored to even be asked to sit on this panel today with all the other esteemed individuals that are also sitting here with me today. As a longtime educator, over 20 years in the education business, and all of my years have been primarily in populations with underserved students. We know that going all the way back in our history, that African Americans have always been told that we were not as good as, not as smart as, not as capable as. Unfortunately, even to today, it has become a systemic issue that our children come to us today and often still carry all of that from the past with them, that they still feel as though they don't measure up. So as educators, particularly, from this community, we are tasked with not just how do we educate our children, but how do we build them up? How do we encourage them to see beyond even what they think they only can see of themselves? So, I can frequently remember I was blessed growing up in this community that I had parents who were freedom fighters. My mother marched with Dr. King. She ensured that, when no one else was going to teach me my history, she made sure that I knew my history, that I knew the legacy of what it meant to not just be African American, but to be educated, an African American, and standing on, those shoulders, I carry that with me as I work with the students in this community. The bigger issue at this point is our students oftentimes struggle to see themselves in the people who are tasked to educate them every day. If they never see individuals who look like them doing things of greatness, how are they supposed to ever believe that they themselves can reach those levels and those heights? So we are still fighting that daily struggle to make sure that they see not just themselves in the curriculum that we are teaching them, that they see opportunity, particularly within the Montgomery County area. They have to see at very early ages where education can lead them, and that for generations, the story of resistance within the Black community, at the forefront of that resistance has always been that if you had your education, there is not anything that somebody could stop you from doing, because that is the one thing as people of color that could never be taken from us, is our education. Once you learn to read and write, they can't take that from you without literally having to take your life. So when we talk about Black resistance, and we start looking at what does that look like in education over the course of Black history, it really has been in education about the fight to get our children the equal and the same, if not better, education that everyone else around them is getting and receiving. And we are still fighting that battle today. The recent court hearing where we are now saying that the funding formula for Pennsylvania schools is unconstitutional, that case is very likely to become the Brown versus the Board of Education case for this generation, because that is now where the fight is taking place. That is where the resistance is happening, that we are now saying it's not that we don't have schools to teach our kids in, we don't have the materials to give them, but it is still not equal to what is going on throughout all of Montgomery County and even across the United States, that the funding formula, getting the equal and same education that is happening in the other school districts around us needs to also be happening in the Norristown School District. And that is the resistance. Now, that is where the fight is coming from, is to get the same equality in terms of funding and resources into this district that all the other districts around us are getting.
Very powerful. You gave us a lot to chew on there, Dr. Hampton. Mr. Carolina, let's talk a little bit about financial banking. What has been your experience as a financial banking representative in this county, who primarily work with minority communities, and how has financial institutions impacted the Black community?
Well, when you look at the whole history of banking,
You're on mute, Mr.
the whole history of banking has changed tremendously. And when you look at the whole banking community and our community, a lot of times we did not have banking relationships. You still have a lot of people today who do not have banking relationships, not because the bank does not want them to be there, but maybe they have abused their banking relationships elsewhere. Now, before I go any further, I want you to all know that I'm an employee of Citadel, and all my comments, my personal opinions and thoughts. So that's my disclaimer. So I'm not saying this on behalf of Citadel. Citadel is a community-based credit union in business for 85 years under the same name. Very few banks have had the same name for the last 85 years. For me, when it was talked about the ability to read and write, and reading and writing, you should also know how to count. And when I was a child growing up, when I went to a store, I knew how to count how much change I was going to have back. So if I gave the cashier $10 and something was only $2, I knew I was getting $8 back. If I was having an odd dollar amount, I knew that also. Today, because of the way our society is with digital banking, children are not being taught how to bank and count money. So the person at the cashier could be making a mistake because they pushed the wrong button. Banking itself has changed. Years ago, there were several banks that wanted to leave certain communities, primarily the inner city. And the federal government came out with the Community Reinvestment Act in the mid-70s, so that if a bank wanted to leave a community or expand into the suburban area, they had to show that they're still providing services to the inner city. Years ago, I saw that there was one bank in particular, when they looked at their numbers, they realized they had a lot of locations in the inner city, but people were not keeping money on deposit. They were coming in to cash their checks, right? Get their benefits, but they weren't keeping money on deposit. So as a result of them not keeping money on deposit, the banks realized they couldn't afford to keep providing full banking services in that area. So they came up with something called a 3-2 center. And the 3-2 center was basically just a financial, like a check cashing facility. So when they reported to the government, they were able to show they still had a presence in the community, they still provided services, and that allowed them to expand into the suburban areas. When you look at housing, when the Housing and Urban Development Program was first started, it wasn't designed for people of color. And in Detroit, they had this wall called the 8 Mile Wall. And that wall came about as a result of, in order for a builder to build, he had to be a certain distance away from the inner city or the Black community. So they built an 8 Mile wall to separate the other side of the tracks from where they were trying to build, so the folks would get some money. Now, for me, I've been in banking all my life, and when I finally read how the banking industry and the housing industry came about, I was surprised. I said, because here I'm in an industry that at one point didn't allow people of color to have home ownership. Now, when you talk about generational wealth, it's something that has to start within the family. Now, I don't know how my grandmother did it, but 1937, when she moved from the South, she bought a house in North Philadelphia. And in my particular family, all of my cousins, we all have become homeowners. But the one thing I will say, my father and my mother were hardworking parents, just high school graduates, but my father understood the value of saving money. So for every dollar I earned, I had to put a third of that money away. And my grandmother saw I like to go to the penny store every day to spend money. So she bought me a bubble gum machine. I put my penny in the machine, got my bubble gum. But when the machine filled up, she would take that money and put it in the bank. So I'm thinking that maybe I was being groomed as a 5-year-old to go into banking, because money is something that I've always been exposed to. Children today need to learn how to count money, how to save money, and we need to be able to buy property. But there's not necessarily affordable housing. When I say affordable housing, I'm looking at a situation where if a person is only making $35,000 to $50,000 a year, they can't afford to buy a house, right? So there is no real affordable housing as far as I'm concerned. That's my personal opinion. I was blessed to be able to buy my first house at 21 for $11,000 and stayed there for 14 years with my wife. But the mortgage payment was $145 a month. Cell phone bills cost more than $145 a month. But I was able to use the equity in that property and move to Montgomery County. So there's a long way for us to go. There's a lot of opportunities here, but it has to start with people putting money away for every dollar that they earn. As a community, we tend to be one of the largest consumers of products across the land. We represent, say, 12, 13% of the population, but we're spending 50%. Our money is not being generated and recycled within our community. As soon as we get our checks, as soon as we get paid, we're giving that money back to some other community, but we're not cycling or recycling that money within ourselves. So that's my initial remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Very powerful indeed. And let's get Ms. Hill into the conversation. Ms. Hill, what has been your experience as an entrepreneur and employer in diverse and urban communities? And from your experience, what do you see as the system barriers that may impact employment in our Black communities?
Well, thank you for the question. Honored to be here. Just following in Mr. Carolina's steps, I'm also employee for the city of Philadelphia, 30 plus years. So that is a lot of my experience being a human resources manager and director in various agencies and observing, right, in terms of the lack of employment and being very active in the community, observing and being a resident of the community. And what I see a lot of is there's a gap, right? Just in terms of my human resources colleagues will like, oh, we have such big problems finding qualified candidates, but being active in the community, oh, Ms. Carlin, I'm not getting my resume seen. So what is the breakdown? And it's still, systemic racism, that we don't have access to some of the resources and the networking skills that we need to. But I have to say, as a person that unfortunately is laid off scores of people, and employers are not in the business to make sure we stay employed, right? Whether it's government to deliver services as efficiently as possible, in business, it's to make sure that the shareholders get profit. So it's our responsibility individually to make sure that we are developing the skills that are going to add value to the marketplace, right? And if we don't do that, then we will become obsolete. Because, just like technology, you can go through the easy pass lanes or the supermarket. Technology is not bad, but we have to realize, almost like in business, there's something called a SWOT analysis. What are a company's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats? What I submit is that we have to do that for ourselves. We have to understand what our designs are, right? What's our personality? What are our interests? What are our skills? What are the values that we bring? Not everybody, it's money. Other people want to have social impact. But if you know what you want to do, because you've had that exposure, you're more apt to do very good at it. And that's, to me, that's one of the tools for the resistance, keeping your skills sharp, right? And as a person that's been at the table in terms of hiring decisions, what we have to do, the people that are in the inside, not being afraid to speak up. I remember a story about 20 years ago when I was an HR manager for one of the agencies. We had the commissioner saying, oh, we don't have one Black supervisor. Oh, I would love to have a Black supervisor, he says. So he calls me into the series of interviews, and we have a white candidate and a Black candidate. And he's like, and the panel's like, oh, they're really equal. Well, what should we do? I'm like, well, if they're equal and you say you want a Black person, it was a lot of times we feel uncomfortable being at the table. Oh, I'm Black. Well, if I'm Black and you say you want a Black person, I give you permission to get that Black person, right? So we have to be comfortable enough being uncomfortable, saying if we're in the room for a reason, right? So we're working it from the outside of making sure we have the skills, our people have the skills and abilities, but if we're in the inside, we have to step up and do what we can in those arenas as well.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. But as a follow-up, when you were talking about the skills that are needed in the communities, what role has closing of good vocational trade schools played in the lack of skilled or trained workers for maintaining the safe infrastructure in our cities?
That's an excellent question. And I have to say, I'm a proponent of people operating in their gifts, right? Just through assessments and understanding that. And some people are designed to work with their hands. I could tell you a very skilled, technician, could make up to 6 figures working for Mercedes-Benz or BMW, right? But we have some biases in our own communities. We had in the city, we had a very active apprenticeship program where we partnered with the vocational schools in the city. And beginning from 10th grade, you would basically be guaranteed a position if you went through that program, right? Mm-hmm. But a lot of times the parents of Black and brown parents, we just have this mindset that, oh, you need to just go to college. Not everybody's designed for that. Let people use their gifts, right? So not having vocational schools is cutting off the opportunity for individuals to become skilled tradespeople, right, in their field. And we kind of contribute to that also. But yes, closing them down, you're cutting off an opportunity to someone to develop a skill as an excellent plumber or technician or culinary artist, whatever you want to call it. They're not allowed to operate in their gifts. So it causes a problem for that person's self-fulfillment, but also there's a shortage. There's a skilled trade shortage as well, right? In terms of our bridges and our technical, it's not being done. So it's on both ends, it's really a gap.
Dr. Hampton, can you respond to that gap as working an educator in the system? Are there programs for young people to make sure that they're using their gifts, or they're being taught to their gifts?
Well, to answer your first question, no, there's definitely not enough programs. Montgomery County has one vocational school. They have amazing programs at the vocational school. I believe, where we're struggling at in education right now is exposure, and exposing our students to all of the avenues and the pathways to success, which include the trade and vocational programs. For many years, right throughout our Black history, it was kind of looked down upon to work with your hands, to be a tradesperson, to, the electrician, the plumber. They weren't seen as the cream of the crop jobs. The way that those jobs are looked upon now is very different. And so within the field of education, we really do need to shift gears, whereas instead of constantly pushing the narrative that all of our children need to go to college, and not that anything is wrong with college. For some people, that is their path, but for other people, that's not the pathway that is going to allow them to reach their heights of success that they may be capable of reaching. So we really need to start to expose our children early and often to all of the different pathways to success. And that includes the trade programs. They need to be seen in elementary and in middle school, even before they get to high school, that you can go to trade school to be a dental hygienist, an electrician, a computer programmer, the nurse's aide, the early childhood programs. All of those programs are taking place at the vocational level, but we don't begin to talk to our students about this until 8th grade. And then within 2 years, they're supposed to figure out, do I want to go to VOTEC school or not? They need to start to see these things earlier and more often and being more exposed to them, so that by the time they're getting, closer to that age where they need to make those decisions, they've already seen what it actually looks like. And to tie that into the financial piece of it, they actually need to see, what are those real dollars look like in those trade professions, so that they're not thinking, oh, the only way I can get to being middle class America is to have to go to college. When in reality, we know that many of our students that are coming out of the trade programs, they're coming out as high school seniors, graduating with careers, making $60,000 or more a year from the gate. Whereas we have college students coming out with college degrees that, for example, even if you wanted to go into the teaching profession, at most a first-year teacher is guaranteed to make around $45,000. That's a significant gap in income. And if you have the talent and the skill to work with your hands, why are we not pushing you in that direction? Why are we not showing you early on that you do have those talent and those skills? Exposure is everything for children. When we expose them to things and we show them what else is out, it does open their minds and creates a completely different way for them to think and look at the possibilities and the opportunities that are in front of them.
Mr. Carolina, how about you come into this conversation about, I know you mentioned financial literacy. Is there an intersection with education and financial literacy, and how we all can work together to make sure our kids are prepared? You're on mute, Mr. Carolina.
It starts first with the family, or the structure that the child is exposed to, because being exposed to opportunities is important, whether it's going to a park or actually seeing other things that your parents may not do. If your parents are only laborers and they don't have a skilled position, but if you introduce them to a plumber or electrician, right now I've met some young people that at 21, they're earning $65,000 in their very first job, because they went to a trade school to learn how to be a heavy equipment operator. And as it was said before, in our community, we were taught to go to school, get a good education, get a good job. Those days have gone. That ship has sailed. Now it's important to have some type of training so that you can have a skill, because there is a shortage. And a skilled technician will make a lot more money in the short run and over the long period of time than someone who's trying to pay off $100,000 worth of school debt or $200,000 worth of school student loans. So having that mix between the education, formal education, trade schools that are important. And talking to people that I know in the unions, they said a lot of times the children have lacking in their mathematics skills, and therefore they cannot pass the testing that's required to get into an apprenticeship. So that's important. So the math skills are important. So that goes back to what I said initially. Reading, writing, mathematics, those three skills are very important. And then it's up to the parent to expose children. Growing up in North Philadelphia, living in Germantown, at 19, I was able to go to Bluebell for a job. And that was my first time actually going into the suburbs. And I'm like, wow, it's really nice out here. But a lot of children never leave the neighborhood that they were born in. So if they were born in North Philadelphia, South Philly, or whatever community, Norristown, they are never exposed to anything other than a 10-block radius of where they were born. And the field trips are important also. So it's nice to go to a museum, but it's also nice to go to a factory, to go to a warehouse and see what else is being done.
Thank you. Thank you. I keep hearing that word exposure. When leaders of the institutions of education, finance, and employment mirror the population it serves, the people and the society both benefit. We understand that. What factors have been the greatest barriers for recruiting and maintaining diversity with your institution? Let's start with Ms. Hill.
I mean, I'm going to tie it back to the lack of exposure. Like I'm a nerd when it comes to career pathways, and you know, there's 33,000 different occupations, right? If you ask any 8-year-old what they want to be, they're going to say what they saw, right? A doctor, a lawyer. So the thing is, again, it still goes back to exposure. When we are looking for diversity in terms of occupations, let's say forensic pathologist, or if you don't even know that it exists, how you're supposed to study for that, right? City planning, right? Urban planning. There's a tremendous amount of, in terms of underrepresentation in city planning. 90% of planners are white, right? Because if you ask a Black or brown person, Hispanic person, what's a planner, and they're like, oh, is that event planning, Ms. Carla? Like they have no idea. So if you don't know that there's 33,000 different occupations and that you're exploring, you will not even know what to look for, right? But on the other hand, if you have that opportunity and you're like, oh, I'm going to study myself and I'm going to decide what I'm going to do, and you take hold of that, then we're basically fishing as recruiters, fishing in a pond of where it's underrepresented because they don't know what to go into, right? There's certain fields where there's not a problem. Social services, you're not going to have a problem. Social work, right? Anything with Black history, that's what we see. Teaching also, right? Male teachers, there's a shortage, but in terms of female Black and brown, it's not really a shortage. And that's what we see. But those other occupations back in, the back office or the shadows, and they have no idea, you're not going to have that representation. So it really begins downstream with not having a large enough candidate pool to pull from. And then, people that are making the decisions with our own biases, that's another way that it's going to be cut off by that systemic racism as well. So it's really both. It starts really, really early, to Dr. Hampton's point. If they don't know, and then, a lot of people will go into the service like, oh, I got to do something. I'm going to go into the armed services, or I'm like your opportunities really, really shut down, the older that you get. So the younger that you are, if you see talent, and it's, again, it's our biases. There are gifts that we see in our children,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
I remember my youngest son is a singer, right? But when he was like 3 years old, someone was like, "Oh my God, he's so talented." He wasn't even singing, but she was a social worker, teacher type. But parents, you're in the front line, so you're like, "What?" But then I'm like, okay, then my job was to put him into different opportunities. Now, right, he got an opportunity to sing for the Pope. He's studying, at Yale University. But with my oldest one, he always loved politics, like the state of the state. Like he has great position in the political realm. But they're gifts. So listen out to the village when you see, oh, that person's always fixing, that little boy's always fixing this, or that little girl's always, that's an indication that it's sharing what those talents are. Oh, I better get them in that. I better get them in that. So the aunts, the uncles, the whole village is saying, oh, and then you start, so we can create our own exposure paths also, right? And that's
Right.
what I did for my sons also. Start, oh, you don't like that? I remember one of my sons got hit in football. He's like, oh, I'm not. He came right home. He's like, that's not me, right? So the
Mhm.
exposure activities allows you to eliminate what's not good for them, right? Instead of our stuff. That's their life, and our job is to observe and kind of support them through those exposure paths as well. So we have that power to do that too.
Dr. Hampton, Ms. Hill mentioned education, and I remember when I was a young person and several of my role models were my teachers. And I felt very comfortable. They were just good people, a guide, mentors to me. How do you increase that diversity within the educational institutions so that our students are exposed to a diverse populations?
So, well, first, let me just say, and especially just to speak to what Ms. Hill has said, there's absolutely a teacher shortage across the entire United States. And it's bigger than just a Black and brown issue at this point. We are desperate for teachers to come into the profession. Many districts across the state have vacancies like we've never seen in the last 20 years. If you wanted to be, this is the time where we need them so badly. And then to narrow that down and speak more specifically to what is going on within the Black community, the state of Pennsylvania, out of 100%, 6% of the teaching force in Pennsylvania are Black and brown teachers. 6% across the entire state.
Okay.
The Norristown School District mirrors those same numbers. Our district is more than 70% Black and brown. Our teaching population within the district is about 6% Black and brown. So although it is a national teacher shortage, it is a critical shortage of male Black and brown teachers and female Black and brown teachers at this point. There is no easy way to address this, but one critical way to create more diversity is to start early and more often exposing children to what the field of education can bring them in terms of, stability, financial stability within the teaching career, because you are always going to need teachers. And then starting early, we have to create some different and new programs that will start to expose high school students and even middle school students to the profession of teaching and put them on that pathway so that we are helping to assist them to come into the teaching profession. And this is where we're able to partner with like the vocational program. So there are some vocational schools that have created like teacher residencies where high school students actually go to VOTEC school. They start taking teaching classes earlier. And by the time they graduate, they already have 1 or 2 years under their belt, which then decreases the amount, as our other panelists was saying about that debt that students are leaving college with through the teacher residency programs and working with the vocational schools to set them on that path earlier. They're spending less to get the teaching career and the credentials. And so then we can funnel them right in to that profession. If that is something that they believe that is their choice and that's what they want to do, is to become a teacher, is creating that pathway for them to come into the profession with less school debt, and then setting them up, to come in successfully. The other pathway, into education definitely is looking, as Ms. Hill said, it's the other pool of applicants, because you can come into the teaching profession with a degree from any other field. We need everybody. We need scientists. We need accountants. We need business people. We need people who are good with computers, because students have to be exposed to all of these different aspects of education that then guide them into these fields. So if we don't have teachers at the earlier levels showing them computer programming and biology and science and math and accounting, and how does math apply in real life, and how to make sense of those numbers, or even doing the measuring, because he's absolutely correct. You can't get into certain vocational programs at the VOTech school if you have not already successfully passed certain levels of math. Back in the day, VOTech was seen as the kids who aren't going to be able to succeed in college. So that's their other path. It is not like that anymore. We have some of the most brightest and intelligent children going into the vocational program, and they have to be able to computate and do high levels of math to even get into some of the vocational programs, because they are going to come out making more money than even college graduates. So that speaks volumes. How do we get children to see this earlier on? We need more teachers. We need teachers in all of these different areas. We need to create new programming within schools that allow us to expose children to all of these different types of careers within the school setting, and within the curriculums that we've created earlier on. So it's the shortage is there. And, we know that given the population of who Montgomery County is made up of, we have a significant number of students that are free and reduced lunch, that are coming from households where they are living at or below the income poverty level. And so, it's not enough to just say, when you come into the teacher, you can just sit and teach the curriculum. You have to come into this profession knowing that you are going to have to wear many hats. And people are emotionally and mentally prepared to come in to know that they have to be the teacher, the parent, the counselor, the nurse, the doctor, the psychiatrist. We wear all these hats throughout the day, in order to bring our children up to where we need them to be, so that we can send them out into the world prepared to successfully be adults that can contribute positively back into their communities.
Thank you. Thank you. I know Mr. Carolina, he had to transition. I want to get him in on this. We'll come back to him. But Ms. Hill, let's visit how, as a community, what can we do to help minimize these disparities that we see in employment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. It's a overwhelming process, but I think each person doing a little will help, right? Whether it's identifying, I know, Dr. Hampton and I keep talking about the early exposures, and it seems so overwhelming, and it's a partnership, right? Schools are not solely responsible for educating our children. We are also, as a village, as parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, right? And again, taking advantage of the opportunities that are out there. There's so many different exposure programs, museums, people willing to help. And sometimes the parents are overwhelmed, if you're working 2 or 3 jobs. And so if you're not a parent, right, in terms of volunteering, big brothers, helping with your own immediate relatives, talking, a lot of times our community, we don't talk about money. We don't talk about careers. We just we separate it. But children are willing to you think they're not listening, but they are paying attention, right? But sharing sometimes just talking, when they take your kid to work day, or every little bit helps. And I mean, just like me, I come from I was born and raised in New York. My mother's an immigrant from Costa Rica, and my dad was an entrepreneur. And a lot of Black female immigrants, and she was a registered nurse, retired registered nurse. I'm not that person in terms of nursing or doctor. I put doctor
Mhm, mhm.
in 8th grade because I wanted to be successful. What my passion is helping people in the economic realm, right? In terms of economic empowerment, whether it's business or careers. So, but when in undergrad in college in New York, we had a family friend that was in human resources there. Human resources would not have been on my radar if it wasn't for her, right? So again, we have different people around us that we can just expose. I would have been in the hospital thing, being a nurse or a doctor and not having that passion. I've probably supervised over 100 people directly or indirectly, I mean, through subordinate supervisors. And what happens is the person that is designed to do what they're supposed to do, they do it so much better, right? And a lot of times as an immigrant daughter, like, oh, people just have to have a good work ethic and pull up their pants and make good. I want the good work ethic and I want the person working in their design. But if you never see it, if you never experience it, then you're not giving your best to society and we're not receiving the best. Like you would not want me to be a nurse or a doctor because that's not me, right? I care in theory, but that I'm not that way. So you want people flowing in their design so they can really add to that. So it's taking advantage of all the programs. There's so many programs out there. Again, I just see this disconnect in terms of gaps, right? There's nonprofits that are having these exposures in STEM and different careers. But if you're in a different career, also go out and share it. So what tasks can we perform individually? Look at our, instead of, oh, all this, yes, the system is broken, all that, but what can I do? What can I do, right? In terms of sharing yourself, right? If you, I think it starts with us knowing that we know we have a broken system. And that means we have to look at what tools and what resources can we bring to the market and to our own families and our communities to help push that resistance forward, right? I think that's part of it.
Now, as an expert in your field and you see these gaps and I think about someone on the outside who's not involved in some of these things and know this information, what can, and Dr. Hampton, can you speak to what can, or give us 2 things that our community can do to learn more about these disparities and get some resolutions? From the outside looking in, it seems a bit daunting.
Oh, so just in terms of taking advantage of what's in this, what is there also, right? Like when I was visiting colleges with my sons, nobody was in the career exposure offices. I mean, there's career development offices in colleges, right? But nobody looks at that, right? Guidance counselors in underrepresented markets, you don't really have time. They have some of the tools, but usually you're going with other things, right? In terms of bad behavior, mental health issues. So it's really finding the exposure programs, funneling them in that also, right? Funding that also, right? Just in terms of the political realm, having more guidance counselors at schools, because my sons have been in public schools and private schools. And what happens is the private schools, they spend a lot of time on assessments, on figuring out what the kid is really made. I've lived the difference. I see the difference, right? So it's advocating for things that make a difference also in terms of school, showing up to schools, right? I remember just sitting around a lot. If we're sitting around, we need to be volunteering at our people's schools, right? And just being there and being supportive also. And maybe a list of the resources where we could plug in. But at the end of the day, it's also being responsible because now everything's on the internet, right? So even programs like this, right? Of that exposure. How many people knew that there were 33,000 different occupations? So that blows your mind because we're like this, the society trains us to be a certain way, right? But we do have access to all this information. But I hear your question, how can we organize ourselves where it's really systematic solution? So I think it starts with that exposure that it is broken. I think we all agree that it's broken, but how can we organize that to really move forward?
Right, right. And I keep hearing that 33,000, seeing that 33,000 jobs is still in my head too. Dr. Hampton, would you like to add to that?
So I would definitely say, you know, just to follow in her footsteps is the exposure is huge, but then how do we as a public school system create those opportunities for exposure within the systems that your children are coming into every day, right? Because we know that our parents are trying to keep the lights on, keep food in the refrigerator, keep clothes on their children's back. They're carrying the daily responsibilities, which just given the current financial market has become so increasingly difficult just to maintain the status quo. It's even more imperative for us as educators within, you know, the public school systems to create these opportunities for our children, right? That when we talk about that village and what do we need to do as a village, it really is working together hand in hand to move our children in the direction that we want them to go. And, you know, and I always say our children, because I see every student that I serve in this building, in addition to the 3 that I actually birthed, as all of my children. You know, a lot of what our kids choose to go into is what they are exposed to. My daughter just happened to take in high school early childhood as an elective. And it exposed her to working with at the daycare level. And now she's an early childhood education major at Morgan State. You know, I made sure that she was exposed to HBCU so that she could see what all of her options were, or that if she chose not to go to college, she could go to vocational school to continue in that pathway that would immediately put her in daycare centers doing what it is that she found she had a talent that she never even knew until she actually took a class in school. So when we talk about exposure, that's what I'm talking about, is creating programming within schools to expose students to those 33,000 different pathways.
Okay.
Because as much as our children do need to learn, they need to learn how to read, they need to learn how to write. They need to learn that, you know, the math part of this is critical, but then they also have to see, well, what can I do with all of that?
Right.
A lot of the times, you know, and even mine, I got 3 in college at the moment, and every last one of them feels as though, why do I have to take all these other extra unnecessary? Why can't I just take the classes that lead me to exactly what it is that I want to do? Right. You know, that whole idea of the liberal education, this generation is seeing past that, and they only want what they need to go into the fields that they have an interest in. And they often say, if I knew back in high school or middle school what I'm seeing now at the, you know, college level, their pathways may have been slightly different. So we really need to work together as a community to create programming both in and out of school. And we need to start to move really in the direction of creating community schools. And a community school is basically where the school building houses everything for the community. When we need services, everything is right there within the school building. The doctors, the nurses, the psychiatrists, the mental health piece, the community in terms of the actually having the career pathways office right in the school, so that everything is housed in one place for the community to be able to access all of the programming. Because it's not just our children sometimes that need the programming. We have a lot of parents that need to find new pathways as certain careers are becoming obsolete and people need to shift and pivot. They want to make more money. They need to be exposed to what are the other pathways that I can take the talents I've gained through other skill sets and other careers I might have been in. How do I now bring that together to move in a different pathway? And when we expose our parents to that, the byproduct of that is that they're exposing their children to that. So, you know, it all works together for the good of the community, and we're uplifting the entire community.
Okay, community schools. Okay, well, let's go back and revisit this the resistance, Black resistance. The 1950s and 1970s, it was defined by actions such as sit-ins, boycotts, walkouts. We all know about these things. People came together, all different kinds of people came together as allies to fight injustices against discrimination in other sectors of society, from employment to education. So why do you think there is resistance? Why do you think resistance efforts are frequently silenced by history? Why aren't we really talking about these issues so that we can learn from them for present day? So why do you think they're silenced by history sometimes? Dr. Hampton, let's start with you.
Well, oftentimes they don't want us to know our history, right? Because there is power in seeing the magnificent and great things that groups of people have done. And oftentimes, history it's just that, right? It's his story. So depending on who is telling that story in that moment in time, it depends on the information that you will receive from them. So the best way, right? They often said, especially for people of color, that the best way to keep us ignorant was to hide something in a book because we did not want to read. And so they would write the books that would often exclude our history and our resistance efforts and how we have, fought back both silently, as well as, having great revolts at times, pushing for our voices to be heard in all different fields. But when we choose to, when all of that is out for everyone to see, and they see just how great and just how powerful a group of people that we are capable of being, and that they cannot continue that narrative that we are less than or incapable of, there's no better, reason than that to want to try to silence the resistance, is to make sure that if we don't know, how do we continue to grow off of that? If we don't know what the resistance has been, we don't know what our ancestors did to position us to be great, how do we then take those efforts and continue to build and grow off of them? And it's the pushback. And oftentimes they don't want the pushback. They don't want to see us arrive or to be great or to elevate above the station that that groups of people have tried to keep us at for a very long time. With the Black community in and of itself is such an economic powerhouse and a force to be reckoned with, that they don't want us in that fight and in that battle at the end of the day. So they're always looking for ways to try and keep, what we do to resist, to fight for change, to make a difference, to move, always moving the goalpost every time we get closer, so that they're, just to try to keep us at a certain level.
Mr. Carolina, are you with us right now? Well, Ms. Hill, would you like to respond to that? Why the silence?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Carolina.
Okay. Excuse me. I had to step away for a little bit. I'm in my car. I missed part of the conversation, but sometimes we always have to be able to stand up and fight for our rights when necessary, because if we don't fight for ourselves, no one else is going to do it for us. And when we see an injustice, we need to take an action on that. The protest is helpful, it's important, but it needs to be a peaceful demonstration or protest. And one of the killings of one of the young Black men in the past, I noticed that in some communities and ours, we're tearing up our communities. So we're actually taking away some of the services that are there because we have totally destroyed the businesses that were there, and they don't want to come back into that community. So we have to learn to take care of our own communities in a peaceful way when we do our demonstrations.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Ms. Hill, would you like to comment?
I really link it to Dr. Williams's opening quote, where she talked about, the lion and the hunter telling the story. In terms of all the media outlets, and not just media, the story, the institutions, whether it's schools, whether it's media, whether it's, the entertainment industry, they're not owned by us. So they're going to tell the story the way they want to tell the story, right? So I think that's fundamentally what it is. We're not in power in those majority institutions, and those are the stories that will continue, right? So I think that's the major link there, that we're not in power. So They're going to tell it from their vantage point, not from,
Mm-hmm,
we can only represent ourselves, right?
Mhm.
So we have to build those mechanisms to tell our story.
Right, right. There's beauty and diversity of voices. And finally, we want to end with this question. What gives you hope about the future of this community? What gives you hope? Mr. Carolina, we'll start with you.
The hope that I have is that we continue to grow as a race. And as I walk into various businesses, like especially on the retail, banking, there were very few Blacks in banking. So as we continue to educate ourselves, and whether
Looks like he's
whether we
driving.
go into a trade or a professional setting, we just need to continue to advance one person, one family at a time, and hopefully leave something for our generations, because that's what it's all about, to create generational wealth. I don't know if you touched on this, but when you look at housing, there are many times that a parent might have paid off the house. They die, leave the house to one of the children, and the children will sell the house because they don't want to pay the taxes.
Mm. Okay, all right. Thank you. Thank you for those comments. Ms. Hill, what gives you hope?
I mean, I do have hope in each one of us, right? These just linking with one another, the community, our commitment to being better and informing each other, right? I think it has to be in one of us. That's who's going to save us. Other people are not going to save us, right? So it's just that commitment. And that's one of the reasons I'm here. That's one of the reasons there's, I know, Black History is the shortest month is 1 month, but it's a start, right? It is exposure. We talked about exposure. People have to realize that there's a problem and we have to do our part. And I really do believe in terms of individuals and doing my part and believing other people will do their part.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Hampton, what gives you hope?
I mean, just every day I walk in and I look at the students coming into the building every day, and there is hope right there. Every day is not a perfect day by any stretch of the imagination, but they continue to come to us to guide them, support them, pour into them, teach them the history that they may not get anywhere else sometimes. And you have to have hope in order to keep stepping into this every single day. And you have to be able to pour that hope into the younger generations, because they have to be able to pick up the torch and move forward with what we plant the seeds of. So we have to be dedicated to teaching them and reaching them at every step of the way. We have to be very passionate and intentional about ensuring that they understand that Black history is American history, that they see themselves in every aspect of their learning, and that they know their story. So that by knowing their story and what the past has poured into them, that they can then move forward in creating greatness. Because they're looking at us, and then eventually there will be groups of people who will be looking at them. And what is it that they did to move the goal, to keep moving closer to the goal. So, resistance is not something, resistance is born out of struggle, but it is also a seed that we have to continue to plant of how to keep fighting, because it's never going to just be handed to us.
Right.
So we have to show them how to go and get what it is that they need in order to be successful.
Wow. Wow, this has been a beautiful, beautiful conversation. And I hope that more conversations will come out of this. Thank you to the stellar panel, coordinators of this program, county leadership and staff who support such efforts and community participants. I encourage you to return to this space next week, Wednesday, February 15th, same time for a conversation to discuss Black resistance, law enforcement, policing, and community advocacy and organizing. You must register for this event, so please go to the county website, www.montcopa.org/Black History Month to register, and also share a link with a friend. This event is open to all, and we enjoy the diversity of opinions. A recording of this session will be posted on the county website. As we leave this space, again, thank you for attending, but I want to share a quote with you that would encourage you to continue the conversations. Civil rights activist and former Congressman John Lewis advised, "Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble." Thank you all again and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. I appreciate you.
Amazing job, Toika. Woo-hoo.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, guys.